Welcome, everybody. If this is your first time joining us, it's great to have you here. If you've joined us for other events, we are so happy to have you back. I'm Patrick Gallagher with the ELC team. I help produce all of our events, conference, podcasts, and all of our other content. We know that high-performing teams deliver results that massively outweigh their peers. The problem is that most of our default leadership modes are reactive. And there's this famous saying where hope is a poor strategy. Being reactive and hoping for high performance is a poor strategy. To reliably build and sustain a high performance engineering org requires purposeful leadership. And we have Bela Labovitch joining us to guide us into the world of purposeful leadership and high performance. As we welcome up Bela, she's going to cover things like the 3 focus areas that optimize your org's performance, how to uplift your team performance, and harness force multipliers and create intentional team composition, how to assess your process, how your org communicates and collaborates, and how to make the right technical choices to execute and measure thoughtful changes to your tech and architecture. So she's going to cover a lot of really incredible topics. Bela is going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we have a couple community members who are joining us live that will help us learn through their situations and their case studies. We'll also be incorporating Q&A throughout. So with that, let me introduce you to our speaker, Bela Labovitch. Bela is the VP of Engineering at Athena Health, building healthcare tech to provide accessible, high quality, and sustainable healthcare for all. She has a multi-decade career in software and has served as CTO, VP, architect, and developer across different startups and large enterprises. She was selected as one of the top 25 women leaders in healthcare by the Healthcare Technology Report. And she's passionate about helping raise up women leaders in tech. She's a STEM mentor at Girls Who Code and founded Athena's Women in Tech initiative. Welcome, Bela. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I am truly delighted to be here. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you my experiences and also learning from some of you in the audience during the discussion and Q&A. So I'm going to be talking about building and sustaining a high-performance engineering organization through purposeful leadership. So earlier in my career, I became a manager of an engineering team. And I took manager training and I came back pumped. And so I set up my one-on-ones, I set up my team meetings, I attended all my agile ceremonies, worked with each individual on my team on their careers, and I really thought I was doing great. And then came the end of the year and I found out I got a does not meet expectations rating. And I was devastated. I'd always been a good performer. So at my performance review, I asked my manager, I said, what happened? And so he responded and he said to me, Bela, your teams did not progress substantially. You did not raise their performance. And so that was what got me thinking about what my goal as an engineering leader is. And I came to the conclusion that our goal as engineering leaders and influencers is to really create and sustain high-performing teams that deliver high-quality outcomes for our businesses. So what's a high-performing team or organization? So really, a high-performing team, I'm sure many of you have seen them in your careers. They kind of look like this picture. There's a group of people that are gliding peacefully, speedily, happily, I might add, and really in unison towards a goal. And when you think about a high-performing engineering team, it's really a team that delivers quality product and outstanding results in shorter cycle times. They continuously improve and learn, they're resilient. So questions you should ask yourself is my team or are my teams working at their full potential? Are they delivering outstanding results in what I would consider impressive lead times from inception to production? Are their results of high quality? And are they continuously improving? So no matter how your team is doing, unless they are perfect, like this picture. Maximizing your team's performance is really a journey that you should be thinking about taking. So I've taken this journey a few times in my career. I currently head a 250-person organization, and I'm on this journey again with my leaders. And this journey really begins with purposeful leadership. So purposeful leadership it requires that your actions be of intent and meaning. And it requires you to take the time to ask yourself questions about yourself and your team. So I'm a practitioner actually of yoga and meditation. And one of the practices that I've learned is mindfulness. And mindfulness is really about sort of being present and stepping back and seeing things as they are, and then analyzing and introspecting. And so I say introspect because the process of purposeful leadership really starts with you, right? You want to bring intentionality when it comes to leading your teams, because it's how you lead and how you teach your teams to be that really matters. So I found a framework by Urban Myers useful in thinking about this. So Urban Myers, in his book, Above the Line, which is a great book, by the way, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But he says that you achieve the best outcomes by getting and staying above the line. So if you want your teams to perform above the line, you should lead from above the line. And what he says is that the performance of a team really rises and falls on their behavior. And winning behavior is intentional. It's on purpose, it's skillful. Certainly there's room for creativity, by the way, but yeah, it's really intentional. Whereas below the line behavior is really comfortable and convenient. It's our default behavior, and it's a path of least resistance. So it doesn't take a lot of effort and skill, but you're gonna get just okay results, right? So as a leader, you want to be conscious and make choices in alignment with your larger vision, or where you want to go, and not just go with your default response. And then what you'll find is your responses to events directly influence outcomes. And we like to think that we're all above the line, right? But actually, when you think back, we often default to sort of blaming, complaining, or defending ourselves. Urban Meyer calls it BCD behavior. And those are the moments where you want to call yourself out, you want to call your team out, and remind yourself that purposeful leadership and great outcomes are really correlated with your behavior. And I think back really on my career, and I remember, times like, for example, there was a moment where my teams, we were working on a product release deadline. And we were working really hard, and we actually did not meet that timeline. And the engineers groused, it was product's fault. They kept changing the requirements all the way till the end. And I sort of bought into that grousing. And I started talking to my leaders, and I said, yeah, it was product really didn't know from the beginning exactly what they wanted us to do. And, I sort of went on this defending, complaining behavior. When I think back on that time, I realized I knew we were likely not to meet the timeline. I really should have partnered with product a whole lot earlier and behaved differently. So really, leading intentionally is something we as leaders and influencers really want to be mindful of. Right. So one can examine organizational performance through the lenses of the three areas we as engineering leaders think about: people, process, and technology. And I'm guessing some of you in the audience are at startup companies, others are at larger organizations, and each of you has probably developed a set of things that has worked for you. And so what I'm eagerly looking forward to is hearing about this during the Q&A session, during the discussion. But what I'm going to do right now is share with you some of my experiences and techniques that I've used to successfully maximize the potential of my teams. All right, so first, on the people front, let's start with people. our default behavior tends to be to let our teams organically come together. We hire, our teams come together, and you look at your teams, and some of your teams are stellar while others are just average. But you can purposefully compose a team by inserting just the right people. And what do I mean by this? So we've all seen these 10 percenters or 10Xers, right? That top 10%. And these are the folks that are willing to challenge their teammates, who work really hard, they're self-motivated, they inspire others, and they know it's not about them, but it's about the team and the sacrifices. They sometimes sacrifice their own productivity for the productivity of the team. And so they're the force multipliers. And one of the things that I've found that has worked for me is really hiring and using or surveying and finding those 10 percenters and using them to uplift your teams, like harnessing their power to motivate the 80% of folks that are reliable. They come in, they do their work. That 10% can lift the 80% into the 10% category. And I've really seen this work quite well in my career, and I continue to use that technique. Now there's the bottom 10 percenters, right? And those, I would say, don't spend too much. I mean, try to uplift them into the 80%. But don't focus all your effort there. I know I personally have spent a lot, spent a lot of time on that bottom 10%, really trying to get them to perform. And maybe controversial, but I say spend a little time there. And if it doesn't work, let them go. It's not gonna work. And really focus on that 80% and lifting them. And lastly, really high performance teams have that right mix of people. And if you notice your high performance teams in your organization, you'll see them, they tend to have this chemistry. They eat lunch together, they socialize together, and then they produce these great outcomes, quite quickly. And so what I would say is, as a leader, intentionally examine your team composition and put together folks with just the right chemistry for great performance. All right, so the next thing I'm going to discuss is around equality and empowerment. And many of you know that teams thrive with autonomy and independence. That's really the core of Agile. And setting the teams up for this is important. But again, I'm sure some of your Agile teams are doing great and some of them aren't. So I've come to realize that culture is a critical component to the success of autonomy. And you need to sort of seed your culture by ensuring there's a focus on equality and empowerment at the individual level first, right? And to set up intentionally a culture where all voices are equal, titles don't matter, the loudest person doesn't always get the say. And these are moments where we're all really focused on equality, on diverse hiring practices, and bringing your own, your whole self to work, and do continue to do that. But if you intentionally seed your culture this way, and then set up your teams to operate like the small startups, then they will be able to actually leverage that autonomy and independence that you give them, and they'll be empowered. And once you set up your teams, your equal teams, one of the things that I see as a real difference maker in high performance teams is they're invested not only in the how of what they're doing, but really in the why and the what and the business problem they're solving. And you want to give these teams sort of full authority over their code, over their architecture, and then you'll find them being really accountable and delivering outcomes in small increments. So that's really, again, the parting thought is team empowerment is at the core of high performance, and seed it with the right culture. That can really be a difference maker. The last thought I'm going to share with you around on the people front is seeding a culture of accountability. So most companies have a goal setting process. You probably do as well, right? You set your annual goals, you set your OKRs. And if you're anything like me, I found in the past that you kind of get through midway through the year and you've forgotten where you started out and what your goals were. or Agile is inherently about goal setting. But oftentimes, Agile teams will just sort of punt their story sprint after sprint. So what's really worked for me is to tackle accountability in almost small pieces, right? So really by defining performance as a metric, just one metric, right? And for that metric, really picking a goal, making it visible, visiting it every month, maybe tying rewards to goal achievement. And I have one metric that's worked really quite reliably for me, and that's percentage of story points committed versus delivered in a sprint. And what we've done and what I've done in the past is had teams pick sort of a goal for that metric, 85%, 95%, some number, and then examine it sort of month after month. And in the beginning, I've always found that there's resistance. Managers, for example, will say to me, yeah, well, teams are just going to sandbag. They're just going to pick low goals so that they can meet them. You know, developers aren't so happy about being held accountable. But what I've seen happen is the measurement of delivery actually works. And then sprint after sprint, suddenly, you know, even if a few teams choose to sandbag in the beginning, they tend to kind of raise their own bar over time and improve their own performance over time. So what happens in the end is sort of the entirety of the team is incented to hit that, say, 90% goal, and they all work together, and it increases their overall performance. So once you've seeded this culture of accountability, it pervades and really leads to better performance. All right, so now I'm going to move to process. And again, remember, you're trying to actually really figure out how to improve or maximize your team's potential and their performance. And a question that you as a leader want to ask yourself is process getting in the way? And a way to do that is, I'm going to put up a few questions that Melanie Ziegler, who leads a VP forum in the Boston area, listed as questions you want to be asking yourself as an engineering leader. She wants, you know, she says you should ask, are you delivering value for your customers and results each quarter? Do you deliver when you say you will? How quickly is value being delivered for your customers? And once you do that, you know, and then this is sort of my thought is I ask myself these questions always, and then focus on one area that you want to improve. And then look at examine your process and say, where is my process preventing my teams from actually executing optimally? So for example, when I started in my division, one of the things I noticed is our cycle time was inordinately long. So it was taking a long time from project inception or feature inception to actually feature delivery. So I sat down with my leaders and we looked at what was going on, and we noticed two things. We noticed firstly that we were delivering full featured alphas. So it took a long time for teams to actually start working on what they were doing and delivering that alpha. And then our customers were saying, this wasn't really what we were looking for. And then we'd have to go back, and teams were just sort of getting a little dispirited about having to refactor their code and work on things all over again. That was one of the issues. The second issue is teams were sort of being given things to do. Here's what you need to get done. And they weren't involved in sort of upfront in actually defining the business problem and how to solve the business problem. And so that was sort of getting in their way as well. And so what we did is we together defined what we call a discovery process. And we're engaging developers at the time of inception of actually thinking about the business problem. And we've defined a process with UX, with product. So teams are actually getting engaged early, and we're discussing how to develop MVPs and have sort of configured our process to enable us to do that quite quickly. So not having an optimal process can really come in the way of performance. And as an engineering leader, you should be intentional about asking yourself questions regarding your process. My second thought around process is really around optimizing your operating cadence. So your operating cadence is really the rhythm and pace at which your work gets done and is organized. Your meetings, your processes, and your org structure really comprise this cadence. So when you're at a startup and you have a couple of teams, things work pretty well. You're incredibly efficient. Agile rituals are enough. And then maybe you grow and you have 5 or 6 teams, and every team is trying to communicate and do dependency management with every other team. And suddenly your developers are complaining, too many meetings. And that complaint is actually a signal to you to step back and think about, examining that operating cadence and seeing if your teams are set up for maximal communication and collaboration. So for example, right now in my organization, we have 37 Scrum teams. And so what we've done is we've organized ourselves into what we call zones, and we have 4 zones with 6 to 10 Scrum teams each. And then each zone has a group of zone leaders, a zone architect, a zone engineering manager, a zone product person, a zone UXer. And they run their zones like startups. And then we have a cadence for communication between the zones, a monthly cadence where teams communicate, they read out. And that's really worked quite well for us for this last year. But developers have started complaining right now, saying too many meetings, too many meetings. So I know that this is the time for me to really start, me and my leaders, to examine our operational cadence again. So I think being really intentional about your cadence, continually examining it rather than letting it organically develop, can be a difference maker when it comes to team performance. So it's something to think about. Okay, so now I'm going to shift my thought process to things I've learned on the technology front. How do you approach a project or initiative and sort of some ideas on how to approach projects? So one of my thoughts is around, I've learned that for technical and architectural changes, you really want to start small and then make incremental changes. So at Athena, for example, currently we're on our monolith to microservice journey. I suspect a lot of you are on this journey. And when we started this journey a little while ago, we had a lot of enthusiasm. And so, our platform team started developing components. Our project team started writing microservices. And there was a lot of enthusiasm, but very soon dependency management became a nightmare, for example. And, we weren't as efficient as we could have been. And if I think back, really, if we had started small, defined a few components, a few microservices, really done some steel threads, that would have been really improved our team performance and efficiency. And on the similar vein, I'd say for larger projects, really using a breadth-first approach and trying to deliver something end-to-end rather than starting either too much in parallel. You might have 4 Scrum teams working in parallel and then actually stubbing out their interfaces to other teams and then trying to bring it all together in the end. It really works better if you just take a sliver of the functionality you're trying to deliver and deliver that first. Or for example, right now we're working at Athena, we're working on our posting process where we take remittances from our payers and apply them to medical claims. And this process is incredibly complicated. We have, thousands and thousands of lines of code developed over 20 years. We're trying to refactor the process, make it more efficient. And we started on the journey saying, the process has 4 different components, and we started on the first component and we went way down, took us months and months. And then we're realizing, no, it makes more sense for us to step back and work on all 4 parts of the process at once and deliver something end to end. So that's another area of sort of technology, sort of how to approach technology processes that, again, help improve team outcomes. The third thing I was going to talk about is, as a leader, you want to always focus on developer productivity. And this again happens at different times. In a startup, the things go pretty well. As you grow, you might start seeing that your teams are working on the same, each Scrum team is working on the same thing and reinventing the wheel again and again. For example, for us right now, each team is writing a microservice, and they're starting from ground up. And so we realize, we have to do reference architectures and do reference patterns and reference implementations in order to really maximize the productivity of our teams. As your teams grow, you as a leader might decide, oh, this is the right time to spin up a platform team. So again, you want to continually be thinking actively about developer productivity. And then my last thought is, as engineering leaders and influencers, we want to keep an eye on technology. And that's pretty obvious, actually, right? This is really what we want to be doing. But if you're anything like me, it's very difficult to find the time to actually intentionally make that time to learn. And so I thought I'd share with you what I do right now that's worked very well for me. I from 4 to 4:30 every day on my calendar, I have a meeting set up, a Learn meeting set up. And I have a few members on my organization that I've been invited to the meeting. They're my learning buddies. And when we started out, we met 5 days a week, and we would watch videos and we would learn together. Now, 9 months later, we're down to 1 or 2 days a week, but we're constantly making sure and challenging each other and learning. We were watching a video on service meshes yesterday. We learned Terraform last week. So we keep learning. And so again, as a technology leader, intentionally make that time to learn. All right, so last thing I'm going to talk about is scorecards. One of my favorite sayings is a Peter Drucker saying, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And certainly I've talked before about just picking one metric. But what I have done a few times in my career is really talking through what metrics really matter for my organization and creating a scorecard of these metrics. And then measuring these metrics month over month. And these metrics are clues, right? And it's not just me. It's actually my leaders and the teams themselves measure these metrics. And I just put a snapshot of our current scorecard that we're using right now on my teams are using. And so the teams actually measure these metrics. We measure them at a zone level and actually at a product level. And these metrics give us clues. So we all talk metrics a lot, but really developing a scorecard like this can be helpful. And brings intentionality to your metrics. So it's something that I would recommend trying, seeing if it works for you. All right, so I'm going to end this talk with a call to action and say that you as a leader, as an engineering influencer, really may need to make time to purposefully think about your goals and your team's performance. Otherwise, if you're anything like me, you're going to end up going from one meeting to the next, one email to the next, and before you know it, the week is done. You just don't have the time. So what I do, what works for me is I put 2 hours on my calendar on Fridays. I don't need 2 hours. Usually an hour of that 2 hours gets eaten up. But during that hour, I actually spend time intentionally thinking, or sometimes not thinking, and seeing what comes to me. I was listening to Jean-Denis Grace from Plaid. His podcast is up at the ELC site if you're interested. And he speaks of going for a 60 to 90-minute walk weekly with a piece of paper. And that some weeks things come to him, some weeks things don't. But this is a practice that I think is very useful for sure. And one of my favorite sayings is, get on the balcony of your life, because from that balcony, you have a better chance to observe the range of possibilities. So make time to get on that balcony, everyone. And with that, I'm going to end this presentation. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Bela. I think you spotlighted where everybody should be looking, and I think brought up so many thoughtful questions that we should be asking ourselves as leaders to help illuminate the different ways that we could be more purposeful. And I think especially hearing all of the different stories and examples of how you've applied this at your time at Athena Health was really, really powerful. And so now we're going to transition to our live participant session. And so with that, our first live participant is Fatih. Fatih, would you like to jump in and dive into your question or challenge?
Yes, hi, from Istanbul. This is Fatih. I work for Siemens as a project lead, and I'm relatively a new project lead, I can say, like almost 3 years. So it was great for me to hear experience from one of the most experienced engineering leaders. So that's great. Thank you very much, first of all. And what I want to share with you is exactly that Bella mentioned about that specifically how it is important to show R&D team members to what kind of value we are creating for our customers. So instead of just sitting in your chair and focusing on your source code, no, not that. Just change your mindset and also focus on what kind of value you're creating. So I would like to share my experience and ask a question, Bella, how she's managing that kind of challenges in her, let's say, corporate. So what we are trying to do is actually normally, project manager or scrum master getting the requirements from product managers and product owner, prioritize them, and most of the time R&D team members, developers, and test engineers do not involve that kind of processes. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make them these barriers, break these barriers, and I'm trying to invite the pre-sales colleagues, sales colleagues, and product manager, and I'm trying to let our developers and test engineers to contribute to creation of user stories, and I'm trying to let them ask directly to questions to sales, to pre-sales, to understand what our customers are exactly looking for. So we are organizing that kind of meetings, and we are organizing some live demo sessions. We are inviting them. So my question to Bella, how I can increase this value-oriented mindset in my team?
Well, I think, Fatih, you're doing the right things, because I think you put your finger on it. Teams just don't want to just do. They really want to understand the larger context of what they're doing. And it's certainly so motivating to know the difference you're making, the business problem you're solving, the metrics sometimes around these problems. And so I think you're doing the right things in terms of bringing together different parts of your organization and having these discussions. Sometimes you can make it sort of part of your process even. And that's what's worked for me sometimes, is making it part of the process early on, actually setting up making sure these meetings get set up as part of your discovery process ahead of when the stories actually make it onto the backlog of the team. So that's something you could think about. Can I sort of define a process that allows us to engage in again, a cadence? That's one way to do it. But I think you're really doing all the right things. I think that can be a huge difference maker in team motivation and productivity.
Yes, indeed. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fatih. Bela, one of the questions while we're talking about, helping empower different team members, a question that came in from Julie is one of the big things is, she has a bunch of different cross-functional product teams she works with and different ICs from different departments. And so she was wondering if you could share about some of the more effective ways that you've seen to create a healthy balance of power between the leads of the different functions that you work with. Is there anything that you found to be really effective in balancing that power with different teams?
Good question. And this is always a struggle, right? And sometimes this is sort of that above the line thing. You want everyone to be above the line. You want everyone to be equals. And that's all great in theory, but it is a struggle. And I think sometimes knowing who takes the lead, right? And sometimes in defining that business problem and knowing what the customers want, yes, indeed, that is product. In defining architecture and how we implement something, that's definitely development. And then kind of even articulating what's going to come in the middle and define the what together and collaboratively. And I think sometimes articulating that and living that can be a difference maker. Julie, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's something that's worked for me. The other thing that's worked for me is being persistent and saying, where's the developer voice here? Where's the developer voice here? For the better part of the year, I've been saying that in various meetings and various forums, and then it kind of starts resonating, and then you start eventually coming to the table as equals, although with some sort of having a little more, I don't know if the word is power, but taking the lead in different areas.
So it's both bringing the leads into the conversation and also intentionally being the voice for those departments if they're not in the room for those conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You want to be that voice, and you want to constantly be sort of talking about it till things starts changing, either by process or by having those right meetings. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other question, so speaking of meetings, so Amber shared with us, the biggest challenge that she's found is that, now in this remote setting, there's all these different meetings. And so the big challenge being, how do you minimize meetings, but still promote collaboration, especially if team members have never met in person? And so do you have any insights about the balance between the number of meetings and how you promote that collaboration?
That's a tough one, because it's not a science. It's really an art but I think what I find helpful is to really sort of, even on a piece of paper, just write down all the meetings, because you're not always aware of them, or you don't actually sit and think about them. And then you can see things emerging, or whereas you can see where you're doing the same thing in two meetings, or this is just a status meeting, we can merge into this other meeting. But I think there's a good point there of being remote and needing a little more face-to-face in meetings. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I'm pushing back at you a little bit on intentionality, where you look at each meeting and say, what is the purpose of this meeting? And then which meetings will promote collaboration versus which meetings are just status updates that we could do offline. And I think that balance can be helpful.
Yeah, I think the question that you shared about creating the awareness around your meetings, I think is powerful, because if that's not being examined, then like what we've been talking about is that you are up to your default and you're performing below the line then when you're leaving that up to your default operation. So I'd like to invite up our next participant. Our next live participant is Venkat. Venkat, would you like to jump in and ask your question or dive into your challenge?
Sure, yeah. Hi, my name is Venkat. I work for Gracenote as a Senior Director of Engineering. I have it's more of a question about a challenge, which is like, in terms of accountability, Bela mentioned that, you can track it with like metrics and have clear goals and all of those. The one thing that I've encountered from time to time is like some teams are self-motivated, but in some cases, I feel like there is, a lack of consequence of not being accountable can lead to like repeating the same mistakes over and over again. But that being said, I'm really trying to figure out what is a good consequence of not, facing a goal, in the sense like it shouldn't be heavy-handed. It shouldn't be like, creating fear in people.
Mm-hmm.
It should still be motivating. But what do you think is a good way of creating consequences which will motivate the teams rather than creating fear and having them move away from it?
Sure. And I think you're absolutely right on the creation of fear, and that your culture really matters and is a huge difference maker. So that's really great insight that, we as leaders, we're here, my perspective is we're sort of here to serve the teams, to maximize their potential and motivate them, not be punitive. Certainly tying rewards to metrics. So the flip side is helpful. Or even end of the year assessment bonuses, things like that. That can be helpful when it comes to accountability. Sometimes a healthy competition is helpful. If you see, if you're displaying metrics for every team and you see that some teams are really hitting it out of the park, and then another team is sort of That's inherently motivating for teams. That we're just human, and when we're human, when we're measured, we try to do better. When we're comparing ourselves to others, we try to do better. So yeah, those are just some thoughts around accountability. The other thought that has worked around accountability is for us, like modeling accountability as leaders as well. And so what I do with my leaders, we've picked our annual goals, and we actually read out on those goals. We examine them first among us every month, and then we read out to the larger organization month after month. And I think really trying to model that accountability as well is helpful. So again, there's N different things you can do. And I think teams are people. And so sometimes you as a manager know your people best, but those are just sort of ideas that I had. But I'm going to turn it on you, Venkat. Like, what have you found helpful and motivating your teams?
Yeah, I think the one thing that has helped a little bit in the past is, of course, displaying the metrics from other teams, which is like talking about a couple of things I'm going to talk about. One is sharing how the other teams are doing it. Like the end of the quarter, we kind of do like a retro as how the teams perform without having like any blame for anyone that fell behind. It's just like trying to really analyze what went wrong. Like, did we overcommit? Did we undercommit? Did we not expect certain things to happen over the course of the quarter, right? So we do like compare some metrics, and then some patterns will emerge to say like this team, which hit it out of the park, they had some goals at the start of the quarter and it didn't change much over the course. But this team, they probably got distracted with a bunch of other things. And these are the things that we could have done, right? Yeah, comparison between teams does motivate people inherently. Sometimes it doesn't. Some teams don't like it because they feel like they are built differently and the nature of their work differs from the other teams. The other thing that also helps us outside of the bi-weekly, so we have a sprint, we have a 2-week sprint, and then we do a sprint retro every 2 weeks. But we also have a cross-functional check-in once a month. So we don't just let it run and just look back at the end of the quarter, but outside of like the Scrum teams meeting at the, for each sprint, every 2 sprints, we have a checkpoint with the leaders from product, from other teams, from engineering, from business. We talk about like, where are we now? Like, we set out to do something. Are we on track? Are we overall doing fine? Is something falling behind? Should we expect some changes for the next coming weeks, right? So is there something we need to like drop right now? Or is it like too late to drop right now? And should we just make some changes, right? So those 2 things help.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Venkat. Along those lines, if for anybody else listening in, if you have ideas or solutions to some of these questions and want to expand on some of the things that are shared as well, we invite you to share your ideas and solutions in the chat as well, because the impact of our community is in the knowledge sharing that we are able to produce between all of us. So you are invited to share your ideas in the chat as well, and we'll call out those as they come up. Bela, one of the questions, the perspective we've talked a lot about is for people that are leading their teams now and are looking to, inspire high performance and do purposeful leadership now with their current team. Mark, who's joining us, his question is more about coming into a new situation and leading a new team. Mm-hmm. And so he was wondering if you had any advice. So if you were a new leader coming in, what would be like your top agenda items as a purposeful leader to empower your team?
Good question. And I'm thinking back, I was a new leader a year ago. There's 2 kinds of leaders, right? There are leaders who come in and make a change real quick. And there's others who sort of come back and are a little more purposeful. We keep coming back to that, but who come in and listen a little bit. And I think really listening and observing and actually measuring team performance, like looking for a little while on how your teams are, the outcomes they're producing, like the team quality, doing some kind of a measurement first. and then sort of initiating the conversations around on areas where you feel that you can actually help improve performance, improve outcomes. I think just being sort of methodical is really helpful. I find that the leaders that have come in and quickly changed things haven't been inspiring for me. The question was around inspiration. But I think with time, as a new leader, focus on learning, but actually be examining outcomes, be examining quality, be examining your culture. Very important culture. I mean, I didn't talk about a lot of things around performance. I just picked a few, but really examining all of that, examining how goals have been set, how goals are being adhered to, examining accountability. I think a lot of that is important as a new leader of what you should be doing. But starting out with optimism and really, I think the sort of your spirit and your optimism and how you come in makes a difference, a huge difference. So I hope I answered that question.
Absolutely. So one question that was shared ahead of time to adjust the topic a little bit. So the definition of high performance from this person was perceived to be related to peer groups. So different engineering teams being evaluated on their performance at a very similar level. Do you have any advice for people who manage mixtures of high performance and average teams? And I guess if there are so that's one advice for if you have a high performing team and an average performing team, do you have any insights for how you would, either inspire the average team to be high performance or empower the high performing team? So we can start there, and then there's a follow-up question for that. We'll start with that one first.
Sure. So definitely you're going to have a mix, right? If you've reached the nirvana of having all high performance teams, you're amazing. So this is really about being on a journey. And the things that work are, even if you have one or two high performing teams and you have the other teams sort of two things, right? One is having the other teams watching them, right? That's inherently sort of motivating to see another team. And the second is around metrics. Again, you might define performance as a metric, display metrics, and having teams sort of look at each other's metrics. Those are difference makers to allow teams to inspire other teams. That's one thing that works. The other thing that can work is moving around team members over time. I talked about inserting those force multipliers. And so you might have a force multiplier that gets a team on a great path. And you could consider moving that person to actually getting another team on a good path. So that's another thing that you could be thinking about.
That's a really interesting way to think about how to strategically use your force multipliers to then uplift a team. Yeah. That's really, it didn't occur to me. So
we've successfully done that, actually. Yeah.
Really? Can you share a little bit more about the story for that?
Just around a force, and I'm just thinking one example, and I don't want to talk too explicitly right now, but a force multiplier being on a team really hitting it out of the park, and then us having we had a very important project that we wanted to bring in in a certain timeline, and we knew we had a great team, but they were chugging away, and we knew that if we inserted this person, there was a good chance that it would really accelerate development, and sure enough, it did.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah.
So the follow-up question for this one is, so we're talking about peer groups. So say for at the organizational level, or for a team that is sort of unique in how it's being measured or what its performance looks like. So like there's no peers or no alternatives, or if it's the org level where it's the entire organization. Do you have any insight on uplifting those singularly measured delineations of teams and organizations?
I think uplifting teams in general, it's around a lot of different things. It's around leadership. It's around setting really clear goals. It's around autonomy. It's around investment in the what and the sort of the business problem you're solving. So I think regardless if you have a number of teams or you have one team, it's always the same thing, sort of things you want to be thinking about as a leader. And it's comparison doesn't always work. I think, it doesn't. Sometimes it's really about what you're doing, and you want the team to raise their own bar, right? And you can sort of make the circumstance such that they would want to do this. But in the end, it's the team, it's the individuals.
That to me seems relieving, that no matter the complexity or the scale, that the fundamentals persist through that. And I think
Absolutely.
when in doubt, go back to the fundamentals and revisit those and be thoughtful and intentional with those. I think that's relieving. We have another live participant joining us. We have Tal. Tal, would you like to jump in and share your challenge or question with Bela?
Can you hear me?
I think so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How do you tell the development teams about big changes that are coming, that they might be a bit uncomfortable because they're on their comfort zone, but change is needed? How would you do that?
Change management, big topic. I think we could do an hour on change management. Change management really is a skill, and I don't know if there's one way to do it, because again, teams are humans, and different humans digest change differently. And so I don't know if you're talking about technical change. I don't know if you're talking about organizational change, leadership change. There's different kinds of changes. But in general, you as a leader, how you firstly look at yourself. How am I handling the change? And you want to make sure that you're first processing the change and handling it in a positive way, and then framing it to the team in a transparent but optimistic way. Hopefully you've arrived at that point, right? And then sort of setting up a meeting and communicating it in a transparent, optimistic way, and then setting expectations on what to expect. I think that's important as well. So I'm looking at Tal's picture here, actually, but I think that's what has worked for me in the past. At Athena, certainly we were purchased by a PE company. We had a lot of leadership changes. We had a lot that has happened in the last year. And again, being transparent, being honest, but also processing it personally first, and being able to view it in the optimistic. I'm naturally optimistic, but there's always a way you can look at things that can probably bring good things. And certainly it's worked well for us this year. We've had a tremendous year, and all our hopes sort of have worked in terms of our change leadership. So I don't know if I answered your question, Tal, because I wasn't sure about what change you were talking about. So I'll turn it on you if you wanted to talk about your change and how you handled it.
No, this is going to be a change. It's more about organization changes, moving team members to a specific squad instead of we want to change our testing per squad, having a dedicated squad for testing, and some new qualities might be needed, so not everyone is suitable for that. So that is the case.
I will tell you, the one thing that really makes a difference is explaining the why. I think if you can explain the why very well, people will be okay, right? If you just make a change, but you don't explain why you're making the change, that's where you start having larger issues. People don't understand, and then they make up their own stories. We all as humans make up stories in our heads, and so that would be my sort of best advice, is to actually explain the why.
Yeah, the why is pretty obvious. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tal. And thanks so much, Bela. A few of the other questions that had come in had been directly related to, how do you manage being a change agent? And I think your last comments really help provide the support, and that, like, when you're disrupting or changing, being really transparent with the why is a really powerful way to create that sense of stability. And so thank you. So another question that we had come in was, so you've shared some incredible stories about how you've helped support the performance of different teams. Can you share do you have a few other examples of when, from your experience, when you've had a team that was low performing and you helped elevate their performance? Can you share an example or a story related to that?
I think it was, for example, the story that I just talked about. It's really, oftentimes when a team is low performing, yes, so the answer is yes. Sometimes the chemistry of the team is just not working, right? And so in that situation, what we did was a couple of things you can do, or I've done, right? In one situation, we had a low performing team whose chemistry just wasn't working. And we actually disbanded the team and had the team's members go join different teams. So that was one way that I've done it in the past. The second is to insert that force multiplier intentionally. That can be a difference maker. But I think as a leader, really it comes down to examining why the team is low performing. Because there's so many reasons a team can be low performing. It can be motivation. It can be the folks are tired of what they're doing. They've been doing it the last 3 years. It can be, you have just sort of too many low 10%ers. I mean, there's really 15 reasons why. And so really coming as a leader, coming to the crux of why, and then making a change. And, I think I alluded to some of those changes in my presentation. Those all come from examples of things that I've had to do in terms of looking at a team saying, this team needs a force multiplier. This team needs a change in their chemistry. This team isn't engaged in the sort of larger business problem. I need to engage the product leaders and the engineering manager into figuring out how to get them engaged there. So yeah, again, I think everything I went through in the presentation, I do have an example for that's actually worked and worked through the years in different parts of my career. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bela. So we had one of our members in the audience had a couple ideas to expand on some of the things we were talking about when joining a new organization. So I wanted to invite up Naga to jump in and share the insights they were talking about in the chat. So Naga, do you want to jump in and share your approach for when you join a new organization?
Yeah. Hi, guys. My name is Naga. I'm a former director of engineering at Expedia Group. And I want to talk about 2 points around when you join a new organization and driving motivation. I think a conversation with Venkat, and Bela. Something that we have done extensively is around striking a balance between business value generation, engineering or operation excellence, and people or personnel development. And one of the hallmarks of maturity is to strike that balance and having trade-off conversations between those 3 things. And most often, those 3 are disparate pillars which organizations don't try to blend. So having this conversation with your team around how can you strike a balance between those 3? How can you introduce technical debt versus driving engineering excellence, and having crystal clear conversations drives that motivations levels up. And we have done that extensively. It does take a lot of capacity in terms of striking a balance for the team, but it seems to have worked for us. Another thing that came up around change management, interestingly, I was reading a book called Your Brain at Work. And change management inherently drives the fight or flight mode in people, and recognizing the triggers for that. And there's a good model around that called the SCARF model. So if it touches or plays with status of individuals, certainty of individuals, autonomy of individuals, whether they relate to people, and F is fairness. So if you look at those 5 letters and see if any of the change drives a deviation in those things, it would likely drive the fight or flight mode. And reframing your approach or reframing your points to address these 5 areas would likely not completely eliminate, but have a way of building a bridge between those folks. Would be curious in listening to thoughts around those things.
Yeah, absolutely, Naga. Bela, Naga, incredible points. I think, especially when you're talking about your brain at work and the fight or flight response. And it makes me think about one of the things that you mentioned, Bela, that helps contribute to people feeling empowered, which was both equality and empowerment at work. And when you introduce that, it creates that sense of safety and security that overcomes the fear that you were talking about, Naga, which I think is really powerful. And so, Bela, I was wondering if you could expand on if you had any ideas or actions that help reinforce or create that sense of equality and empowerment at the individual level. If you had any more examples of what that would look like within the specific teams or organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, culturally, it's one of those things you sort of talk about and then you act on, right? You talk about all of us being equal, but then when you're sitting around a table, you really make sure that everybody, there's no loud voice, and the ones that have sort of a quieter voice, bringing them up. It's a sort of a cultural thing that once you start talking about it, once you start acting it, and you know your leaders understand it, and then it kind of goes down to the teams. I think that's really important. I think examples are also around just like I said, sitting around a table with people and noticing the person or the people that aren't saying anything, and actually either right there, or sometimes it's too hard for them right there, right? And sort of coaching them behind the scenes, and then saying, in the next meeting, I'm going to call on you. I want you to start talking. And having those conversations around equality are difference makers. Certainly as women, we sometimes tend to not speak up, or we tend to find that we're quite, you know, people sort of talk over us. And so, you know, noticing that, I think as leaders, noticing that, that's the crux. Talk about equality, notice inequality, encourage people, coach people. There's, you know, a lot of things we can do around that. Certainly looking at our hiring practices, talking about bringing your whole self at work. There's a lot we can do to actually get that level of equality at the individual level and have everyone feeling empowered. I think it comes down to empowerment as well. And not everyone feels empowered. So as an organizational leader, putting your finger on where there's a lack of empowerment and how you can make that happen.
Absolutely. And I mean, Naga, just to bring back what you mentioned about fear and that being like the fight or flight response being what inhibits people, I think that is such an important point. And I think one of the other things that you'd mentioned, Bela, was about, you know, we were talking cross-functionally to be the voice of the different departments within your team at an individual level. If you're facilitating a meeting, to be the voice of people who maybe are less inclined to speak up right away, to then invite them and give them that sense of, you are welcome, your opinion is needed and important, please contribute. I think that's such an important feeling to give people to contribute in a way that makes them feel safe and eliminates that fear and fight or flight. That's awesome.
I actually also like the conversations that Naga talked about, you know,
Yeah.
when you come into an organization, actually discussing sort of the trade-offs with your team. I think that can be empowering to the team, and that can sort of set up for a great culture.
Absolutely. We have so one of our other participants, Fatih, I know you had you had another question you wanted to jump in with. Fatih, would you like to jump in?
Hi, thank you very much again. Yes, my second question is about actually, Bela mentioned about the team harmony and team chemistry. So I think it's also really, really important topic. And one of the biggest challenge that I faced was conflicts between team members. I mean, it was a huge problem during the development phase, and they considered me as always as, you know, solution finder for their conflicts. I always tried to coach them, but it was really hard for me to be productive and you know, keep the team also productive. So my first question is about how Bela would react on that kind of conflicts. I know that it's a huge topic, personal conflict, process conflicts, you know, regarding products, but you know, as a general, let's say, perspective. And second one, while Bela was talking about hiring, that kind of conflicts showed me again, you cannot, you know, achieve anything without having the right people on the board. So hiring process is one of the vital thing in an organization, I think. So second question is, what kind of hiring process do you have, and what would you suggest us as a newbie, you know, project leader?
Yeah. So I have a lot to say about conflicts because one of the things that really struck me when I started at Athena is one of the core cultural values are around universal positive regard. And that, you know, they really, it's something we all think about and talk about a lot, which is assuming that the other person is competent and has good intent. And because we talk about it as one of our foundational cultural values, that's been incredibly empowering for me as a leader, because someone comes and complains to me, you know, and I say, put a lens of universal positive regard on it. And I don't have to say anything more than that. They kind of go, oh, you know, and it helps them step back and think about it. And so, you know, that is one thing I would really recommend. And actually, we've lost that value in our current, this last year with new owners, and we're really trying to bring it back because it's so powerful. Empathy, universal positive regard, because again, these are humans. You know, as far as possible, I do try to let folks to convey trust that you can resolve your own conflicts and not have to escalate to me as much as possible. Of course, as a leader, sometimes you need to help and you need to facilitate, and sometimes you need to make a decision. So, yeah, I think that would be one thing that's really helped on when it comes to conflict management for me, at least at Athena. And I sort of look back saying, I wish I had that value at previous companies where it wasn't so easy to really refer to something that everyone kind of goes, I know what you're talking about. Yep, you're right. I need to think about it. That's also sort of goes back to the above the line, below the line, right? Above the line is actually intentionally working through these issues rather than complaining about the other person or blaming the other person. And so again, as a leader, you can bring these values to your team, and that can really help. Around hiring practices, of course, hiring is very hard to get just right. What we do at Athena is we have these competencies that we talk about that are important to us, both values and competencies. Some of them are technical, some of them are around leadership, some of them are around conflict resolution. Depending on the position, each position has that list of competencies, and we actually precede a list of questions for the interviewer, so to allow the interviewer to actually maybe evaluate the person based on a series of questions. It's always hard, but you'll be surprised. Asking questions actually leads to a lot of good discussion and really gives you a sense of where that person is coming from. You know, I did an interview yesterday and the value I was given was instills trust. You know, and so I had questions around, you know, show me a circumstance where you started somewhere, exactly what we were talking about. You start a new job. How do you instill trust? And you can see what the person's thought process is, and I think that can be helpful. So certainly there's the technical competence as engineering leaders, and we have tests around those. But then there's also the capabilities of the person around instilling trust, their leadership capabilities and things like that. And again, you can be intentional around actually identifying what's important to you, seeding some questions around these, and then distributing them to the interviewers.
Thank you so much, Bela. I think we have one more person joining us live. Vinay, would you like to jump in and share your challenge or question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. So my question is, I am an engineering manager at JFrog, and we do a lot of integrations, which means we do a lot of new integrations. We deal with new technologies and new partners all the time. So at that point, it is very difficult for us to estimate how much effort it would take, because every time a new technology comes, we need to learn it, and we need to go through the challenges of the new technology and sometimes new partners, because the partner doesn't respond for 2 weeks, so the project is stuck. So story points at that point does not make a lot of sense, because for no fault of the developer, they could be stuck or not able to perform because we did not understand the technology or it has limitations and so on. How do we create a more fair metric at that point so that everyone believes in it and wants to follow that?
Right. So I guess I'll turn it to you and say, how do you sort of define performance for your teams? Like, how do you look at a team and say, wow, this team's doing great. Wow, this team could do better. Like, what is your definition of performance?
So at this point, what we say is how many things we delivered as a team. So essentially, we do a quarterly commitment and say these are the things we can work on, and more or less we do deliver on that. Essentially, if something gets stuck technology-wise or because of partner issues, then we raise it up the management and say these are the issues why we are not able to deliver. But in that, as a team, we are able to work together. But as an individual, if a person is getting stuck at 3 projects, let's say in a quarter, and they do not deliver any of those for no fault of their own, how do I say, I cannot say they did not perform. They put in an effort and they did the work, but still there's no output.
Right, right. That's a good question. I mean, I think that's where we come in as engineering managers. We're close enough that we really know that, you know, the person's sort of, I mean, again, depends. There's different ways of measuring, but it's hard to measure developer productivity. We all know this, right? And we've all been trying for a very long time, and it is not a science, it is an art. And as an engineering leader, really looking at the value of the work the person has done. You may not get the final outcome because it was not their fault, but they've developed a amount of code. So I don't think there's any good metric there that comes to my mind, but I think that's where you as an engineering leader really have to use your best judgment and you know, work with the team. Those are typical and hard situations where it's not the fault of any, yeah, there's external circumstances. Now, the one thing that I always say is if you may not measure somebody by their outcomes, but if we're a Scrum team, right, if they can't work on this, what else did they do? There's always something else that they did. So it's really looking at that sum total.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vinay, and thank you so much, Bela. That is all the time that we have for questions, but we have 2 final things before we leave. So first off, Bela, you have covered so many different things about how to be very purposeful as a leader and have spotlighted the places that we can look and the questions that we can use to help drive our thought process to be more intentional and to be above the line in our performance as leaders. The special part and the power of a community like this is that, you know, if we know that high-performing teams deliver the results that massively outweigh their peers, the most effective way to learn is by your peers as well. And that means all of you who are joining us. So the way we're going to close is by collecting and pooling all of the knowledge that we have to make an impact on our team's performance. So in the chat, there is a link to a Google Doc. And so I invite you to click on that link and to share one specific action that you're committed to taking or something that you want to apply to help be more purposeful and thoughtful as a leader or to improve your team's performance. So click that link and jump on there, and what you'll find and what you'll see is all of these different ways that people are applying this into their context, and that will help expand your learning. And so I'd like to, I know some people that have been really, really thinking about this are some of our live participants. And so I know Venkat and Fatih, if you want to jump in and share any ways that, any actions that you're taking as a result of this conversation, would like to invite any of you to jump in and share.
Sure, yeah. So the one thing that resonated really well with me is on the process section, where the teams, like the engineering teams, and getting involved earlier in the discovery process. We've been kind of trying to do that ourselves, where we don't want to take a very top-down approach, or we don't want the product teams to go too far ahead, you know, without kind of knowing what the reality is. So that really resonated well with me, which is like, and we started doing it to get some key individuals from some of the teams which are going to be involved in the project, move them up in the cycle where they get involved with the business teams. further up. That's really good. The other thing that also really resonated well with me is is what Bella talked about, which was the learning buddies thing. I have some teams which say like they don't have any time to learn, and this actually started triggering some thoughts in my head. Maybe have them put some time in their calendar, get together as a team. We've even talked about having some tech talks, and those tech talks they do not always have to be just strictly related to work. They can also be some new technology that is up and coming and they've learned and they just want to share it because it may become relevant to us probably in 6 months or a year from now, right? So, but I like the idea of putting something on the calendar and having the team maybe read a paper or probably see a video and share their thoughts. It puts a pin on your intention, which is pretty good.
Thanks so much, Venkat. Fatih, I'd like to invite you up to share as well. If you haven't jumped on the Google Doc yet, we have a couple people sharing. Mark is going to be scheduling times for team learning and reflection from the balcony. You're doing that this week. Thanks for sharing, Mark. And Thomas, I see you jotting down your ideas right now. That's fantastic. Fatih, jump on in. What are the actions that you're taking?
Yes, I think I'm going to use this uplifting strategy. I mean, I was spending lots of time with the low performance. I mean, I will listen to Bella's suggestion, definitely, instead of, spending more time on loving performance, using these high performance colleagues and uplifting the team is really great idea. So it's one of the greatest, things I heard during the event. So thank you again about that. I'm going to try to use it.
Thanks so much, Fatih. So with that, as we all head off for the rest of our days, I'd like to give the floor back to Bela. Bela, do you have any final words of wisdom or advice for the community?
So my final words of advice or final thoughts are that each of you as engineering leaders, as influencers, are really true difference makers. And really how you lead, how you think, what you do really makes an impact on delivering high quality outcomes for your team. So continue to do what you're doing, but think about it purposefully, intentionally, make time, and you'll continue to make the difference. This is a journey. You're not all going to have high performing teams right away, and maybe never have all high performing teams, but there's a lot you can do and a lot of impact that you can make. So continue on this journey, and I'm really delighted. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share my idea, giving me the opportunity to share my ideas. I'm also really looking to hear about your ideas, so certainly email me. I'd be happy to have a conversation and happy to hear about what's worked for you. So then thank you for this community, Patrick and Jerry. That's fabulous.
Bela, thank you. It's just been so encouraging to see what's going on the Google Doc as well, and just all of the ways that different people in our community want to be more intentional and then to use that to improve performance. And so thank you so much for sharing your insights with our community. It's been really, really incredible. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening or afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. If not, we hope to see you at our summit.